Hello and welcome to English with Ryan. What would you do if you had nothing left? That was the exact question running through my mind the night I sat alone on a cold sidewalk, with only $3 in my pocket and no clear future ahead. I remember looking at the passing cars, wondering how everyone else seemed to have a direction while I was completely lost. Chapter 1. The Day Everything Changed. Just a few years before that moment, my life had already been difficult. I grew up in a small, crowded home, where money was always a problem and dreams felt like something only other people could afford. We worried about food, bills, and survival every single day. And slowly, without realizing it, I started to believe that this was all my life would ever be. But that night on the sidewalk, something inside me refused to accept that story anymore. I asked myself a simple question that would later change everything. What if this is not the end? What if this is just the beginning? In that quiet moment, I made a decision. I decided that even if I had nothing, I could still learn. I could change. I could build something from zero. But I also knew it would not be easy. The next day, nothing magically improved. I was still broke. I was still unsure. And I was still afraid. But something had changed inside me. For the first time, I stopped waiting for someone to save me, and I started taking responsibility for my own life. That decision did not make me rich overnight. In fact, it led me into even more challenges, failures, and painful lessons. But it also opened a path I had never seen before. A path that would eventually take me from having nothing to building a life I once thought was impossible. And it all started with that one question on a cold night. So, let me ask you something. Right now, wherever you are in the world, what would you do if today was your turning point? Because that night, I had nothing. But that night, I also found something far more powerful than money. I found a reason to begin, and that made all the difference. This is the story of how a single decision can transform a life, and how even the smallest step forward can lead to something extraordinary. If you have ever felt lost, stuck, or unsure about your future, then this story is for you. Because everything you are looking for might begin with one simple choice. Tonight could be the moment your life finally changes. Chapter 2. A Life of Struggle. The next morning felt exactly the same. But I was not. The room was still small, the walls still worn, and the silence still heavy. Nothing had changed outside. But inside, something refused to go back to the way it was. I stepped into my day with the same problems waiting for me. My family was still struggling to survive. Bills were stacked on the table like a reminder that we were always behind. Some days we had enough to eat, and some days we didn't. It was a cycle I had known my entire life. Growing up like this shaped how I saw the world. I believed opportunities were for other people. I believed success belonged to those who were lucky, connected, or born into something better. For a long time, I accepted that belief without question. At school, I felt invisible. I did not stand out, not because I didn't want to, but because I did not know how. I lacked confidence, and I avoided challenges because I was afraid of failing in front of others. That fear kept me small. When I tried working small jobs, the pattern continued. I started, struggled, and quit. Or sometimes, I was simply not good enough to continue. Each failure added more weight to the voice in my head telling me I would never escape this life. That voice was powerful. It told me to stop trying. It told me that effort would not change anything. It told me that people like me were not meant to succeed. And for years, I believed it. But now, after that night, something had shifted. The voice was still there, but it was no longer the only voice. A new thought began to appear. Quietly but consistently. What if this is not true? I did not suddenly become confident. I did not suddenly understand what to do. Most days still felt confusing and overwhelming. But I began to notice my own patterns. I saw how quickly I gave up. I saw how often I avoided discomfort. I saw how I waited for things to change instead of taking action. That awareness was uncomfortable. It forced me to face the truth about myself. But it also gave me something I never had before: control. For the first time, I realized that even if I could not change my past, I could change my actions. So I started small. I listened more. I observed people who were doing better than me. I paid attention to how they spoke, how they worked, and how they solved problems. I did not fully understand everything, but I stayed curious. Nothing around me improved immediately. I was still poor. I was still uncertain. But something important had begun. I was no longer asleep in my own life. Chapter 3. The Turning Point. The shift did not happen all at once. It came quietly, through a moment that did not seem important at first. One afternoon, while sitting in a crowded internet cafe, I overheard a conversation between two strangers. They were talking about opportunities online, about learning skills, about changing their lives through knowledge. I did not understand everything they said, but one sentence stayed with me. You don't need money to start. You need to learn. That sentence followed me for days. It sounded simple, almost too simple, but it challenged everything I had believed. I had always thought money came first. That opportunity required resources I did not have. But what if learning was the real starting point? I decided to test that idea. I began with the only thing I could access: free information. Old computers, slow internet, and long hours of searching. I watched videos, read articles, and tried to understand concepts that felt completely new to me. At first, it was frustrating. I did not understand many of the words. I often had to pause, repeat, and guess the meaning. Sometimes I felt like I was wasting my time, but I kept going. I chose to focus on one thing: learning English. It was not easy. Every sentence felt like a puzzle. I struggled with pronunciation, grammar, and confidence. I made mistakes constantly. Sometimes I could not even form a simple sentence correctly. Still, I continued. I started writing down new words every day. I listened to the same audio again and again until I could recognize the sounds. Progress was slow, almost invisible. Weeks passed, and I still felt like a beginner. But something inside me refused to stop. Then one day, something changed. I understood a full sentence without translating it in my head. It was a small moment, but it felt powerful. For the first time, I saw proof that I could improve, that I was not stuck, that effort could lead somewhere. That moment gave me energy. I began to believe that learning was not just possible, but necessary. It became my way forward. Not just English, but everything I could find that might help me grow. I no longer waited for opportunity to appear. I started preparing for it. The world had not changed yet. My situation was still difficult, but my direction was different. And sometimes, direction matters more than speed. That decision to learn became the turning point. Not because it solved my problems immediately, but because it gave me a path I could follow, one step at a time, no matter how long it would take. Chapter 4. Learning and Growth. Learning did not feel exciting most of the time. It felt slow, repetitive, and often uncomfortable. I created a simple routine. Every day, no matter how tired I was, I spent time studying. I listened to English audio while walking, repeated sentences out loud, and wrote down words I did not understand. Some days I felt progress. Many days, I did not. There were moments when I questioned everything. I would read a sentence 5 times and still not understand it. I would try to speak and forget the simplest words. I compared myself to others who seemed to improve faster, and it made me feel frustrated. But I kept showing up. I learned to focus on small improvements, understanding one new sentence, remembering 5 new words, speaking one complete idea without stopping. These small wins did not seem important, but they kept me moving forward. I also began to notice something interesting. The more I practiced, the less afraid I became. Mistakes still happened, but they no longer stopped me. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I started seeing them as part of the process. Outside of learning English, I paid attention to how people worked and communicated. I observed how confident people spoke clearly and how they handled problems calmly. I tried to copy those behaviors, even when it felt unnatural. Slowly, my habits began to change. Instead of avoiding challenges, I started seeking them. I chose to read difficult materials. I tried to understand conversations that were above my level. I pushed myself to speak, even when I was not ready. It was not comfortable, but it was necessary. Time passed, and the changes became more visible. I could understand more than before. I could express simple thoughts. I could follow conversations without feeling completely lost. For the first time, I felt a sense of control over my progress. But growth also came with pressure. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I did not know. It felt like climbing a mountain where the top was always far away. Still, I continued. I reminded myself why I started. Not because it was easy, but because staying the same was harder. Day by day, I built discipline. Not motivation, but discipline. Motivation came and went, but discipline stayed. It became the reason I did not quit. The process was not fast, and it was not perfect, but it was real. And step by step, without fully realizing it, I was becoming someone who could do more, understand more, and reach further than I ever thought possible. Chapter 5. Failure and Persistence. Progress gave me confidence, but it also led me into my first real challenges. As I improved my English, I started looking for opportunities to use it. I applied for small online jobs, simple tasks that required communication. I believed I was ready. I was wrong. The first few attempts were painful. I misunderstood instructions, replied too slowly, and made mistakes that cost me opportunities. Some people ignored me. Others rejected me directly. A few were kind, but still chose someone better. Each rejection felt heavier than the last. For a moment, all the old thoughts came back. Maybe I was not good enough. Maybe I started too late. Maybe this effort would not lead anywhere. I felt stuck again, but this time it was different. Before, I would have quit. I would have accepted failure as the final answer. Now, I paused. Instead of walking away, I asked myself a different question. What exactly went wrong? I reviewed my mistakes. I noticed patterns. My sentences were not clear. My responses were not confident. I understood more than before, but I was not yet ready to compete. That realization was difficult, but it was also useful. So I adjusted. I practiced writing more clearly. I focused on simple, direct sentences instead of complicated ones. I paid attention to how others communicated and tried to improve my own responses. Then I tried again, and I failed again. But this time, the failure felt different. I continued this cycle. Try, fail, learn, adjust. Again and again. There were days when I felt exhausted. Days when I wanted to give up and return to a simpler life where I did not have to struggle so much. But I could not ignore what I had already discovered. I knew that improvement was possible. Slowly, the results began to change. I received fewer rejections. Some people responded. A few gave me small opportunities. Nothing big, but enough to prove that I was moving in the right direction. Those small wins mattered. They reminded me that persistence was more powerful than talent alone. That consistency could overcome weakness over time. I was still far from success. I still made mistakes. I still faced rejection. But I was no longer afraid of failure. Failure had become part of the process, not the end of it. And as long as I continued, as long as I refused to stop, I knew one thing for certain. I was getting closer. Chapter 6. Breakthrough Success. Opportunities did not arrive suddenly. They appeared quietly, almost easy to miss. One day, I received a small message from someone I had worked with briefly before. It was not a big offer, just a simple task that required consistent communication and basic skills. In the past, I might have ignored it or felt unqualified. This time, I said yes. The work was not impressive. It paid very little, and the expectations were clear but demanding. It was exactly the kind of challenge I had been preparing for. At first, I was careful with every word. I double-checked everything I wrote. I moved slowly, making sure I understood each instruction. It took time, but I refused to rush. Days turned into weeks. Something began to change. My responses became faster. My sentences became clearer. I started to understand not just the words, but the intention behind them. Communication felt more natural, less forced. The person I worked with noticed. They gave me more tasks, then more responsibility, then more trust. For the first time, I felt valued for what I could do. The income was still small, but it was steady. It was the first money I had earned using my skills, not just my time. That difference meant everything to me. I reinvested that small success into learning more. Better tools, better resources, more practice. I treated every opportunity as something important, no matter how small it seemed. Over time, one opportunity led to another. I worked with different people. I handled more complex tasks. I improved not only my language skills, but also how I solved problems and managed pressure. The results slowly became visible. I was no longer just surviving. I was building. My financial situation improved step by step. I could support myself. I could help my family. I could make decisions without constant fear. But the biggest change was not money. It was confidence. Not the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you are better than others, but the kind that comes from knowing you can learn, adapt, and grow. I understood something clearly. Success was not a single moment. It was the result of many small decisions made consistently over time. That small message I once received did not look like a breakthrough, but it was, because I was finally ready for it. And when preparation meets opportunity, even something small can change everything in ways you never expected. Chapter 7: Giving Back and Life Lessons. Success changed my life, but it also changed how I saw the world. For the first time, I was not only thinking about survival. I had space to think beyond myself. I could look at my family, my past, and the people who were still struggling the way I once did. I remembered clearly what it felt like to have nothing. The uncertainty, the frustration, the quiet fear of never moving forward. That memory never left me. Instead of trying to forget it, I chose to use it. I started small. I helped my family first. I made sure they no longer had to worry about basic needs. Seeing that change was more meaningful than any amount of money I earned. Then I began to share what I had learned. Not as an expert, but as someone who had experienced the process step by step. I spoke to others who were still at the beginning of their journey. People who felt lost, unsure, and limited by their situation. I told them the truth. There is no easy path. There is no instant success. There are only small decisions, repeated every day, that slowly change your life. Some people listened. Some did not. That was fine, because I understood something important. You cannot force someone to change. As I continued growing, I focused on improving not only my skills, but also my mindset. I stayed curious. I kept learning. I reminded myself that success is not a final destination, but a continuous process. There were still challenges. There were still moments of doubt, but they no longer controlled me. I had built something stronger than confidence. I had built trust in myself. Looking back, I realized that everything began with a single decision. Not a perfect decision, not a guaranteed one, but a simple choice to move forward instead of staying still. That choice created momentum. That momentum created change. And that change created a life I once believed was impossible. If there is one thing I know now, it is this. Your starting point does not define your ending. Your situation does not control your future. What matters is what you choose to do next. No matter where you are right now, no matter how difficult things may seem, there is always a path forward. It may be slow, it may be uncomfortable, but it exists. And the moment you decide to take that first step, everything can begin to change.